For those of you who don't know, I'm David. I work at Discourse, and I am the tech lead of our developer experience team. So I think there's 5 of us who are dedicated to doing things like framework upgrades and making sure that all the other teams have the tools they need on the kind of technical side. So that is full stack. We've spent a lot of time recently focusing on the Ember side because we've had a fair amount of tech debt to clean up on that, as Chris knows. So yeah, that's what I'm going to talk about today. So yeah, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what Discourse is. I'll show you a couple of ways that we allow developers to extend Discourse, and then also go into a bit more detail about how we make that work behind the scenes in terms of the build systems and things like that. And I'll also give a couple of examples of how we're using more recent Ember developments features like GJS and Embroider to enhance those systems. So yeah, so if you have any questions, put them in the chat, like Chris said, and I might see them while I'm talking and answer, or I'll see them at the end. Cool. So yeah, what is Discourse? Discourse is a fully open source forum platform. So we provide tools for anyone to just download Discourse and use it for free on their own servers. And then we also provide paid hosting at discourse.org. Yeah, you've got to make some money somehow. It is a Ruby on Rails app on the back end, and then you guessed it, Ember on the front end. Discourse was launched back in 2013, so the application is about 12 years old at this point. There is still a lot of code that is still 12 years old, which is kind of a testament to Ember and how long things keep working. I had a look back at the first commit, and Discourse launched with Ember 1.0.0 pre-4, so it wasn't even 1.0 when Discourse was launched. So that's pretty cool. We're now running Ember 5.12, so nearly the latest version. We were on the latest version for a while, and we are running Embroider, although right now we're still using the Webpack version, which I'll talk about in a bit. We are a fully remote team spread across 23 different countries, so we pretty much entirely work asynchronously in writing, and yes, we use Discourse for pretty much all of our communication within our team. But more widely, Discourse, the software, powers over 22,000 online communities. So you've probably used it, even if you might not realize it. Our logo is not on most Discourse sites. So I do have a few examples that you might have seen in the tech space. So these are all using Discourse. We've got the OpenAI developer forums, GitLab, Docker. Some Ember friends at HashiCorp use it for their community forum as well. We've got the Vercel community forums. I think that's quite a recent one. Ruby on Rails, Elastic Stack, and Epic Games Unreal Engine, and 21,900 and something others. So there's plenty. And if you want to see more, there are a bunch of examples on our website. And then obviously you can't forget, most important Discourse community out there is the Ember community, which actually existed before the Discord community, just want to point out. So if anyone wants to help start a campaign to bring everyone back to the forum rather than Discord, let us know. It still does get a fair amount of use. I think a key thing is it gets Google traffic when people search for something about Ember, which is great. Cool, so yeah, there's some examples. So just to finish off the sales pitch, why Discourse over something else like Discord? We fundamentally design things to promote asynchronous, thoughtful discussion. So instead of your short 2-word messages and emojis, we want people to take the time to think through their response and write a paragraph or two. It works much better in asynchronous, like cross-time zone environments, exactly like we have in our own team. And also for things like support communities, just getting someone to write something out in paragraphs, often they solve their own problem before they even post it. So that's pretty great. The other big advantage of having it all in long form paragraphs is that it's a great long-term memory for an organization. So as you know, if you search through chat messages in Discord or something, it's kind of a nightmare to find old stuff. And even if you do find it, it's probably the rest of the discussion is all mixed up. It's not in a thread and you never find the answer. But since Discourse organizes things by discussion topic rather than just by groups of people, it's much easier to go back in time and find stuff. Like I can look back in our internal forum and see things that were discussed back at the launch in 2013, which is amazing. And then, of course, for public communities like the Ember one, all of that great paragraphs, long-term knowledge is available on Google. And in today's world, it's also available to AI. So public forums are already part of the training set for loads of LLMs. And then with our own Discourse AI tools, you can further train and get knowledge from the forum for your own very specialized chatbot that knows your community, knows all of the knowledge, all the historical knowledge that your community has, which is pretty cool. That's the last mention of AI. No more AI. The other thing, as you'd expect from open source, all the data is portable. So even if you went for a paid hosting, you can take your data and go host it yourself if you want. It's all open. And then finally, the main point of this talk, but also one of our big features, is customizability. So that can range all the way from just changing your color scheme. It could be lightweight embeds of something, all the way up to completely new features like event calendars, live conferences, automatic translation of content has been a big one recently, integrations with ticketing systems and all sorts. So yeah, that's what I'm going to talk about more about here. Yeah. So this isn't going to be a tutorial on how to customize Discourse. There are tutorials out there. I'll put some links at the end. But today I want to talk more about a couple of things that might be more interesting from an Ember point of view. Maybe some of the ideas would be useful for other apps. Maybe some of them are so crazy no one else would dare go near them. That's probably more accurate. So we'll see. So first of all, just to get some terminology out the way, we have two ways to extend Discourse. We've got themes and we've got plugins. The most fundamental difference is that plugins can customize the backend Ruby on Rails app, and the themes can only do the front end. That backend component of plugins means that they're a bit more restricted in how they can be installed. If you have to be a server administrator to install it. So for example, on our own hosting where we run hundreds of forums on the same server, we control the plugins. But for themes, they're front end only, and we allow any Discourse community admin to go install their own theme or an official theme that we host. They can do whatever they like on their own community. So that presents its challenges, which I'll talk about in a bit. But as far as themes versus plugins go, doesn't matter too much for this talk. Both of them can customize the Ember app in the same way. I'll probably say themes sometimes and plugins other times, or themes and plugins, but it doesn't really matter. Just think of them as the same. Think of them as just plugins if you like. So what can they do? From an Ember point of view, they can add new routes, they can add new controllers, new templates, new services. They can even add initializers. That's particularly important because that is the entry point for our Discourse JavaScript API, which allows you to customize many things on the forum. So you can kind of think of themes or plugins as Ember add-ons. They're self-contained bundles of functionality which use all the Ember building blocks. The biggest difference, though, is that themes and plugins can import from the main Discourse app. So an example use case of that is any theme can reach in and grab our button component from Discourse core and use it in its own UI. So that presents some challenges. And to make things even more complicated, themes and plugins can also import from each other. So a theme could import something from another plugin, and yeah, all good fun. So I mentioned that plugins and themes can add new routes. That is true, it does get used, but it's not super common. Most of the time in Discourse, people want to just customize a couple of routes, the most used ones. So for us, that's the list of discussion topics, basically the homepage, and then the topic view itself. So for people to add content and customize those pages, the main tool we have is something we call a plugin outlet. Oh, initializers. There you go. So this is a plugin outlet. We have literally hundreds of these sprinkled throughout our templates in Discourse core. And wherever we put these is a spot that themes and plugins can render their own content into. Each plugin outlet, as you can see, gets its own name, which is a unique name. And then it gets a set of arguments which will be accessible from the theme and plugin. So this one is called above site header. As you can guess, it's above the site header. And we pass in the topic and the category for people to use in their themes and plugins. So we have an outlet in Discourse core, and we need to render something into it. So we call that a connector because a connector plugs into an outlet. And this is what a connector looks like inside a Discourse theme or plugin. It's just a component. It's an Ember component. The only difference here is in the file path. So we have this magic directory /connectors. You put the name of the outlet, which in this case is above site header. You dump your component in there. You do exactly what you do with any other Ember component, export default. And that will then be rendered into above site header. And if there were multiple ones in here, they would all get rendered under above site header. And if there are multiple ones from different themes and different plugins, they all get rendered into above site header. So yeah, just regular Ember components. They can be used to build very powerful UIs, use everything that Ember has, including services. This one is what we use on new code these days, which is a Glimmer component with GJS, but it could just as easily be a classic component with a HBS file, and that still does exist in some older third-party plugins and still works fine. The other thing, how we've kind of developed these recently, is to add the ability for wrapper plugin outlets. So it works like before. This is a spot where someone can render something into, but the difference is it wraps some default implementation. So this would be where our core implementation of the header goes. And then if a theme or plugin registers a connector, it completely replaces what Discourse core is doing. So that's used for themes and plugins that want to completely overhaul entire parts of the Discourse UI, which is pretty handy. And then this one doesn't have any arguments, but it could just as easily have arguments. So that provides our kind of API boundary there for the information available to themes and plugins. Now, I mentioned we have hundreds of these. So the challenge is, how do you figure out where they all are and which one to use? One way is to look through the Discourse source code. It's open source, you can do that. Maybe a bit tedious if you're not familiar with Discourse. Another way is the Ember inspector. Plugin outlet's just a component. So it shows up in the tree and you can see the arguments. Great. But another way that we've developed is this, the plugin outlet inspector. So we allow theme and plugin developers to turn on a little developer toolbar on Discourse, which floats on the left-hand side. And one of the buttons there is this plugin outlet inspector. You click that and it renders this little badge into every single one of the hundreds of plugin outlets. Then you can mouse over it and get more information about the arguments and the name and stuff like that. And I will quickly show you if it works. You can go to any Discourse site. This is our meta community. And anyone, I'm not logged in here, anyone can do this. If you just type enable DevTools in the console, it will reload. And then we have this floating developer toolbar on the left. You click this top button, the screen goes crazy, and you have hundreds of places where you could potentially render some content. And then you can mouse over one of them and you can get information here. So like the category. And if you want to, you can click this button here. It will write it to the console and you can see all your information about your category in the console. So yeah, that's how theme and plugin developers would discover it. And the cool thing from an Ember point of view here, this entire DevTools toolbar is done as a separate bundle, separate JS bundle using Webpack, using Embroider. So this is only loaded when someone enables it. So regular users are not paying any cost for this kind of extra usability that we've given to developers. So Yeah, that's the plugin outlet inspector. For things that go beyond plugin outlets, we have our JavaScript API. So themes and plugins can write initializers like this, which are given access to our magic plugin API object. That has a bunch of methods on it for customizing different parts of Discourse. But the thing I wanted to focus on here is how GJS has made this so much more powerful. So in this example, we're adding a new header icon to Discourse. So we give it a unique ID, internal ID, and then we add positioning information here. And then here we just have an inline template tag. So for people who aren't familiar with GJS, doing this, literally this generates a component class right there, which is great. So we're creating a very simple component inline in a method call. And it means you can have everything in one file instead of having to go make this one line component somewhere else. And then you can do this as many times as you like in the same file, which is great. So I think that's the most obvious kind of new functionality win that GJS has given us. It's a massive improvement for theme and plugin developers. Yeah. So a bit of a tangent. I just want to talk about our move to GJS. So we finished moving Discourse core to GJS a few months ago. And as of last week, we've now finished migrating all of the, I think it's like 600 plus themes and plugins, which we maintain. So we're now 100% GJS, which is great. And of course, we didn't do that all manually. So it's really thanks to the Embroider team and the template tag code mod that's been developed. It worked, I'm going to say pretty much out the box for Discourse core, which was amazing. As you can imagine, for our themes and plugins, which are weird, we did have to make some customizations. So that's something we did in our Ember initiative pairing sessions with Chris, which is taking that code mod, using its hooks to do custom resolutions and get it working. So we've then, there you go, custom code mod hooks. We then built a separate CLI called Discourse GJS code mod, which wraps up all those customizations we had to do and also adds a couple more transformations for some Discourse specific fun. So yeah, and that's all done now, and we're getting massive benefit from it. In the past, it was really hard. If you looked at a template and you saw a component, you wouldn't know where it comes from. Like for us, it could be coming from Discourse core, could be coming from a theme, could be coming from a plugin, because we put everything in the global resolver. Now with GJS, you want to know where it comes from, you just scroll up to the top, look at the import, it tells you exactly where it's coming from. So it's all much more explicit and easier to see what's going on. Okay, that's GJS. So this is the last little section that I wanted to talk about, which is the theme build system. So I mentioned earlier that themes can be installed at any time via the UI. And end users can switch between different combinations of themes at any time. So it's quite a big problem. We don't want to do a full rebuild of the Ember app every time anyone installs a new theme. It would take too long, especially on our hosting where we have hundreds of forums on the same server. We'd have to maintain thousands of different build combinations. So that's not an option. So instead, what we do is each theme gets built into its own JavaScript bundle and then gets included by Rails when the app is loaded. So the question is, how do we do that build? Oh, wait, not yet. This is what I just said. They can change at runtime. End users can have different preferences. You don't want to recompile the whole Ember app. Yeah, this is the tricky thing. So because we host hundreds of forums on the same server, and we want any admin to be able to install their own theme, it means we're building code that we don't trust. So we need to be very sure that they can't access the file system on our servers or the network or anything like that. So we need to, any build we do needs to be in a secure environment. We can't just run node and say, yeah, have access to the file system. So that's probably the biggest challenge here. And our solution for that is a Ruby gem called Mini Racer. This gives us a very minimal JavaScript environment where we can run JavaScript in a sandboxed way and pass information backwards and forwards to Ruby. That means it doesn't have any access to Node APIs, so no file system, no network, nothing like that, no crypto libraries. So that does make it tricky because a lot of things depend on those APIs. We can't just run an off-the-shelf tool and expect it to work. So how are we doing it now? When an admin installs a theme, we load all the code from GitHub, stick it in the Postgres database. Then for each file, we run it through a very lightweight compiler, which is running in that mini racer environment. So that means content tag to do GJS processing, which also uses WebAssembly, which is fun. Then it goes through Babel and Ember template compiler. And then finally, we get it out into AMD format, which if you've looked at the source code of an Ember app, you've already seen it's like the define and require statements, which, yeah, we define the module. Then when a client requests the JavaScript bundle, for a theme, we stick all of its modules together and just send them to the client. So the build system is very dumb. Like it doesn't understand any of the imports or anything. It just spits it out to these defined statements and lets the client figure it out. And that does work great at the moment because Ember CLI uses AMD as well. All fine. But if you've been following how Embroider works and the way we're going with code splitting and tree shaking and all that fun, AMD just is not a path forward there. So we need a much smarter build system for themes, which will eventually, hopefully, be able to work with a Vite-based Discourse build. Yeah. And so the future. So this is what we've been working on with Chris in the Embroider Initiative pairing sessions. We don't have like a final finished solution. So this is a work in progress. I can give you a rough idea of where we're trying to go. And then if anyone thinks we're going in the wrong direction, you can tell us. The goal is to have a single entry point per theme, which is a very clearly defined API, which will be, I guess, a list of initializers, a list of the plugin outlet connectors, things like routes. For people familiar with Embroider, this is kind of like the compat modules system that uses. Once we have that entry point, we then need to do a smarter build, right? Rollup is the obvious choice. It's what Ember add-ons use. But that mini racer security problem makes it quite tricky. Rollup expects to run in Node. Thankfully, they do make a browser version of Rollup, which doesn't depend on any Node APIs, which is great. But it depends on browser APIs, and we don't have those either. So after we played whack-a-mole a bit, we were eventually able to polyfill all of those. You can polyfill browser APIs a lot easier than the Node ones. So yeah, we now have Rollup running inside that isolated JS environment on the server, which is cool. Because there's no file system, we have to handle all of that module resolution ourselves. So we have a small Rollup plugin, which gives Rollup access to that virtual file system of source code that's in our database for themes. And then, so that can resolve imports within the theme. For a theme which is importing something from Discourse core or from another theme, it's tricky. Rollup can't see that. So what we're doing is we have a Babel plugin, which takes those external imports and converts them into something else. Right now, we're essentially converting them to require statements. So it's hooking into the AMD modules. But the idea is that is the piece that we can swap out once we have Discourse core onto Vite. And yeah, so it will turn it into an import of a real type equals module JavaScript file. So essentially, I put it in quotes, essentially that is module federation. There are official kind of spec systems for that for Vite and for Webpack. I put it in quotes because I don't know if we're actually going to be using those, but we'll see. It's going to be something like that anyway. But yeah, once we have all that, the eventual goal is Discourse core on Vite and latest embroider and all that fun stuff. Yeah. So I think that's pretty much all of the bits I wanted to say. So just a few key things to end with. I mentioned earlier about classic components and Glimmer components. The fact that we can use these old and new things simultaneously has been super important to our plugin and theme ecosystem. The fact that Ember always introduces the new system before removing the old one is great. It means we've never had a cliff edge of like all themes and plugins need to update at the same time with Discourse core. There's always been a transition period and deprecations and all of that stuff. So that's a real plus for Ember for us. With the modern Ember developments and embroider, Discourse is becoming even more friendly to developers, especially GJS, been a big one there. And then when we get onto Vite with the bundle splitting, that's going to be a massive improvement for end users in terms of load time. Just fewer bytes is going to be a massive win. And finally, the Ember initiative has been a massive help with our upgrade efforts recently, both in terms of the work that the initiative is doing, which I'm sure Chris is going to talk about, and then also the stuff we've been doing in our weekly pairing sessions as part of the sponsorship. So yeah, we'd love to have even more people who'll join the sponsorship. So yeah, ask your companies to join. Yeah, that's great. I think that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.